Good afternoon, friends, and I'm going to continue with Coleman Cuts the Mustard. This section will interest people my age and over, maybe some of the young ones, but I don't expect them to care. However, I do care. Coronavirus. I think yes, I'm going to start here. Coronavirus, how and why thousands of old people have been murdered. They have been murdered, and you'll believe this by the time I finish reading this, because it is the truth. Murdered. I won't see 30 again, unless it has a 1 in front of it, and as a result I have to say, definitely feeling unwanted, superfluous, and generally surplus to requirements. My government and the health service clearly regard me as a nuisance. These are the words of Dr. Vernon Coleman, but they apply to me as well because I'm older too. Though the former is happy to send me income tax demands, not me, and to accept my checks, and the latter is doubtless ever ready to blush daintily if I should be overcome with the desire to enliven my Thursday evenings with a little light clapping or saucepan banging, though to be honest, even if I had been inclined to follow this most curious custom, I would have felt a little foolish, since we have no neighbours, and I fear the rabbits in our garden would have been a trifle startled if I had lost my mind, stood on the doorstep, and tapped a wooden spoon the bottom of an ancient saucepan. Well, Dr. Vernon, I have 31 neighbours in these flats in this very building, but I never heard one of them clapping a saucepan or going on the front porch or the back door or any outside thing, unless they're all busy watching their televisions. I don't know. Some of the young do not seem too concerned about the way their elders have been treated in recent months. But Dr. Vernon, do they ever care, these young ones? They can't wait to hear there's going to be a funeral with some of us. A few indeed have actually cheered as folk in their 70s, 80s, 90s and more have been ignored, pushed aside and subjected to the biggest mass murder in the so-called civilised world since the Second World War. The elderly are the new Jews, and if you think the word murder is pushing it a bit, just stay tuned to this channel, as they used to say, and I will explain why it isn't. The young, who have ignored what has happened to the elderly, should not feel so comfortable or be so sanguine, because what has happened to their grandparents will happen to them, with the sole difference that it will happen sooner, a lot sooner. 60 will soon be the new 70. When I recorded my first YouTube video back in mid-March of 1920, I explained why the coronavirus scare was a hoax. The title was Coronavirus Scare, the Hoax of the Century. I said amen to that because I believed it too. I suggested that it was either a hysterical overreaction to a disease no more deadly than a common or garden flu, or a devious ploy to terrify the world in order to create a fearful, obedient population which would accept a scary array of new laws in the belief that by doing so they might just survive a form of the flu which was being promoted as a disease slightly deadlier than the plague. I said back then that I suspected that one of the underlying aims of the politicians who were overselling the coronavirus bug was probably the demonization and marginalization of the elderly. Oh, how they laughed and sneered. I was, of course, widely demonized and lied about on the internet, largely by ignorant and anonymous bullies who would not recognize a fact if it came in a box with the word fact stamped on the side in big black letters. But I fear I was right, and I have no doubt that even as I speak, 1,000 red-faced trolls will be penning their grovelling apologies, I doubt it, and begging forgiveness for their arrogance and stupidity. Well, that's one thing you got wrong. They just keep on churning it out, don't they? They never stop. Right from the start of the absurd and entirely unnecessary process of putting people under house arrest, it was the elderly who were the first to be locked up, or locked in if you prefer. And my aunt still is. I still can't visit her from April. It's an absolute disgrace. She said she'll let me know. Let me know. All this while, let me know. I still ring up and find out, and nothing's changing. From April till now, October the 7th, that's a disgrace. And they've told they're not having Christmas. They've had it early. They had a dinner last month because there won't be a Christmas. So how do they know all that in advance? Are they Father Christmas? For absolutely no good reason, the elderly were told that they had to stay in their own homes to protect themselves. Hospitals and the world. There was never one shred of real evidence for this. On the contrary, it was clear from the start that this cruelty was based on political expediency rather than scientific necessity. Men and women, that's me, over 70, that's me, were told that they could not see their loved ones, and many were told they would be refused medical treatment, whatever might be wrong with them. People who died, for whatever reason, died alone, abandoned by a system they had helped create and pay for. All of us working lives paid for this. It was all total bollocks, of course. The elderly aren't likely to die from the coronavirus just because they are old. The people most likely to die from the coronavirus are the people who are most likely to die from the flu. People who are frail, unfit, overweight, or suffering from serious long-term health problems. As a doctor, Dr. Vernon said, I can tell you there seem to be just two big differences between the coronavirus and the ordinary flu virus. First, the flu virus can kill more people. Second, no flu virus has ever got this much attention or put an entire civilization back several centuries. The fact is that the risk of dying from this coronavirus is for healthy adults minute. However, there have been more deaths than there should have been because of the government policies. It isn't just the lockdowns and the terror that have killed people unnecessarily, but the way the coronavirus has been mismanaged, either deliberately or through gross incompetence. If the mathematical modelers, the medical and scientific advisors, the so-called experts and the politicians had all gone on holiday last January, at least 100,000 people around the world would still be alive. The whole damn fuss has been unnecessary, and many of the deaths were unnecessary too. I have not forgotten about my charge of murder. I will come to that soon. But before I do, I just want to say a few more things about the way the elderly have been abused during all this unscientific bullying and blatant discrimination. And it was and is discrimination. Just imagine the fuss there would have been in the posh papers if it had been announced that all homosexuals, all women, all Methodists were being put under house arrest. Imagine the fuss if the governments had more sensibly announced that everyone overweight had to stay indoors to protect the health services. That would at least have had the merit of being logical. The elderly were, in parts of the world, at least denied all medical care. Many were manipulated into signing "do not resuscitate" forms, effectively signing their own suicide notes by being locked away for longer than anyone else. Their immune systems were weakened. Many without internet access had real difficulty in obtaining food supplies because, despite its promises, their government made virtually no effort to ensure that the elderly received food. The elderly were told that they could not see their families. The big lie was that this was to protect the hospitals, though no one ever even tried to explain why this should be. And the nonsense was highlighted by the fact that in some areas the elderly were told they would not be treated in hospital, whatever was wrong with them. None of this was a real surprise, of course. The elderly have been demonized by the media for a long time. They have been blamed for the poverty, the weather, and anything else you can think of, despite having worked and paid taxes all their lives. Governments see the elderly as worthless and an expensive drain on society. If you doubt that, just look at the sentences given to thugs who attack the elderly. Mug a 40-year-old and you will be punished severely. Mug an 80-year-old and you'll get a slight slap on the wrist at worst, and of course the elderly are sneered at and laughed at. When a movie based on my novel Mrs. Caldecott's Cabbage War was released, the reviewer for the London Sunday Times dismissively and patronisingly described what he thought the movie's target audience as undemanding oldies. I wrote the novel to draw attention to exactly this sort of rampant ageism. And so we now at the nitty-gritty, the murder charge. Some of you may suspect that I am exaggerating, a little hyperbole to draw attention to a small problem. You would be wrong if you thought that. The fact is that throughout the world, countless thousands of elderly patients with the coronavirus were thrown out of hospitals and dumped in care homes. Now let's pause a moment. What sort of people are you likely to find living in care homes? A. Fit young people. B. Fit old people. C. Sick old people. Not difficult, is it? You don't go into a care home unless you are elderly, frail, and in need of some care and attention, because you are probably suffering from a range of health problems. And so, hospitals sent patients with the coronavirus into care homes which were full of frail, elderly patients with health problems, the very people who often die of the flu every winter. No one would ever dream of sending a patient with the flu into a care home. But hospitals sent thousands of coronavirus patients into care homes. The staff in the care homes had no equipment or facilities for isolating the patients who came from hospital with the coronavirus, from the patients who didn't, but have it, who were already ill with respiratory problems, heart problems, or whatever. And guess what happened next? Golly, you really need a medical degree to work it out, don't you? Thousands of elderly, frail people in care homes caught the coronavirus, and because no one would or could treat them, they died in droves because the care workers were scared to look after them and go near them. Negligence in the care of the elderly in these homes has been widely reported. Stories that would make anyone with a heart weep and feel a deep, undying fury. Thousands of older people died alone, with no family or friends allowed near them, and with no spiritual support. The only people they saw were dressed as though for a space flight. In Ireland, Norway, France and Belgium, more than half of all the coronavirus deaths were in care homes. In the UK and Sweden, over a third of coronavirus deaths were in care homes. Wasn't it an amazing coincidence that hospitals all over the world all did the same stupid thing? All dumped coronavirus patients in care homes, like it was planned to kill them all off. He didn't write that, I said it. For governments everywhere, this had the bonus of pushing up the total death rates, so providing some justification for the otherwise unjustifiable lockdowns and the utterly stupid and scientifically indefensive social distancing nonsense. We all know that governments have been doing everything they can to push up the total number of coronavirus deaths by, for example, listing patients as having died of the coronavirus when they actually died with it. Two very different things. At this point, we have to ask a simple question. Were the old people with the coronavirus sent into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, or deliberately to kill off lots of old people? The answer to this question will only matter when the hospital staff responsible are taken to court and tried, as I sincerely hope they will be. If they sent sick old people with the coronavirus into care homes through stupidity and incompetence, then they will probably get away with a manslaughter charge, even if they erroneously expected their hospitals to be filled with younger coronavirus patients. That is still no excuse. But if they deliberately sent old people with the coronavirus into care homes knowing that other residents would catch the bug and die, then the charge will be murder. And we are looking at a mass murder charge of which even the Nazis might be ashamed. If you look at it worldwide, it's millions, and the Jewish people who were murdered were millions. The added bonus charge, by the way, is that most of the elderly people who were sent to care homes with the coronavirus had caught the bloody thing in hospital. Because, as everyone knows, or should know, most hospitals are so badly managed these days that they are the one place in the world where you are most likely to catch a deadly bug. And it all goes back to private practice of cleaning the hospitals with outside contractors instead of their own staff. That started years back. Probably Tory policies that did that. The hospitals in the days when we used to have the NHS in full bloom, 50s and 60s, at its best. Cleanliness was fantastic. You had matrons on, this isn't written down, matrons on the ward, and they kept the wards clean, they kept the staff doing marvellous things that they don't anymore, and they never had contractors cleaning. They had their own cleaners and their own laundries who were absolutely brilliant. They were brilliantly run, all the hospitals in the UK. So no, they never lived up to it, all because of Tory policies, and they're still in charge. Okay, I'll get back to this. In a way, it doesn't really matter whether it was stupidity, incompetence, panic, a lack of care, or homicide. The fact is that umpteen thousand old people died before they should have died, and the hospitals which sent them to the deaths were largely left half empty because the expected horde of coronavirus patients never turned up. The hospitals, hordes of advisors and politicians who allowed it to happen and who recklessly created the circumstances are all guilty and should not be allowed to get away with their crimes, whether they be crimes of omission or commission. We live in rich societies, and those responsible for caring did not care. They dumped the elderly like bags of garbage. The people who were responsible for this Holocaust will probably whinge, wring their hands and say they were all just doing what they were told to do. You've all heard that excuse before. It didn't work then and it won't work now. Dr. Vernon Coleman and I will be campaigning for all those responsible to be tried in court. Yes, think about it. It was a dreadful mark in our history of how we treated our old people. We've still got people living to 101. I have a neighbour who's 101. My mother lived to 99. There are still old people out there who've done grand things for this country. Look how you treat them. Some of you, with the policies you've got, you won't even make 60. You won't even make my age. You need to stop thinking about old people being useless. We're still here. We're still able to do things and help people and do all sorts of things. We're not on no slag heap. We're not finished. We can be useful. Some of us have wisdom. Of course, you young people don't want to know about that, do you? No. I hope there is still some caring young people. I don't like to think that they're all like the government. A very serious subject. This won't go away.